You are listening to the Appearance Radio with Augusto Perez. On today's special program, Augusto's guest is astronomer and researcher GILL BROUSSARD. He'll be discussing his findings about Planet X and how its arrival ties in with biblical timelines. Now, here's Augusto.
This is the Appearance Radio, going where no one has gone before. Welcome to the program. I am Augusto Perez, and shalom. And we are very pleased today to have with us GILL BROUSSARD. And we interviewed GILL some time back. We were one of the first ones, if I remember correctly, to interview GILL, and his presentation was really, really very interesting. A lot of our viewers were very, very interested in it. So I was just praying. I was just thinking about things, and I just thought that, you know what, it's time to have GILL back. So welcome back, GILL.
Thank you, Augusta. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And of course, we have shared with you the background, GILL BROUSSARD's background. He's an amateur astronomer, researcher. He's written a book, and you might want to share a little bit about that. And we also have Larry Taylor with us, and he will be helping us to co-host this radio program. And we have, of course, with us Chuck, our producer, Chuck Wilson, from the real cold state of Alaska. And so let's give it a whirl. And now it's been a while since you were with us, GILL, and a lot has happened. But can you tell us a little bit of what's been going on since the last time you were with us?
Well, we've seen a lot of changes in the weather patterns and the magnetic north of Earth and quite a few other things. And I think the global governments in general are getting closer and closer to preparations for this arrival of a planet eventually. Because, like I said earlier in some of our interviews, I started off as a hardened skeptic whether or not this planet actually existed. And it is a valid, there is enough scientific information to point to a valid planet that has interfered in the past with Earth's history here.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, of course, a lot of people don't believe in Planet X. They don't think it's real. And the reason being because they can't see it with their naked eyes, although there have been many that have seen it with their naked eyes in different parts of the world. But, you know, sometimes you just can't see it. And if you don't have the right equipment, if you don't have filters, the glare from the sun will just make it almost impossible to see it because of its close proximity to the sun. And
it's nowhere near the sun yet. Okay, that's something that YouTubers have jumped on and everything to try to maintain interest in the planet itself. What they are trying to promote is hits on their channel, but it's not there. It's not by the sun yet. Okay, it's if it would be, you'd have like a 40-day warning. It doesn't. That's not the way orbital mechanics works. It just doesn't sit there hiding behind the sun or like near it. The data clearly points to an object coming out of Sagittarius, and it's still there. It hasn't come into our inner orbit near the sun. It would only be near the sun if it would be maybe around this time period, maybe December, but you wouldn't be able to see it. It's still too far away. We've had plenty of time to look for it with a telescope. But in general, the best answer to that is that the government has the ability to cloak objects. I posted a video that shows how they're able to cloak things in the laboratory, where the U.S. government section, military section, is about 30 30 to 40 years ahead of that. So they had that type of technology in a laboratory 30 to 40 years ago. So would they have the capabilities of cloaking it? Without a doubt, especially if you go back and listen to Ronald Reagan's speech to the UN before he put the Star Wars up there. He was, remember how he said, if we put our, if we had an outside threat, posing a threat to the world, that we put our differences aside. And everyone thought that he was talking about aliens. No, the threat is this planet. Just go back and listen to what he's saying again. And this is where your Star Wars came into play, and lasers are used to cloak objects. So until it gets much closer, but there's more than one way to figure out whether or not we have a threat or a planet. Recently in California, there was a forest fire. It was over the hills. You couldn't see the flames. You could see the smoke. You could feel the heat. And by the time you saw the flames, it was too late because the winds were carrying it so quickly to the homes, they didn't have time to react. That's about the best description we have on this planet right now. You may not see it, but we can see the effects from it. The heat and the flame, the heat and the smoke, it tells us in astronomy terms, we have a problem.
So basically from what you're saying is these people, okay, the kings of the earth, the powers that be, the elite, the deep state, however people want to call them, they're using lasers to hide this object. Are they using this laser then, Gil, in conjunction with the chemtrails that they're spraying all over the country and other parts of the world? Is that basically one of the reasons for this chemtrailing, so that they can then use their lasers and other equipment, technology, to cover some of these things?
Well, the lasers are not land-based, the ones they're using for cloaking. They're space-based. That's your Star Wars system that they put up. All right. Plus, these lasers can do multiple things. They can shoot down ICBM missiles. They can zap a target on the ground. It can do holograms, but they can also cloak an object. That's their main purpose. We have a $300 trillion global economy. So is it worth to put a few $100 billion up there in satellites to better hide it, not all the way, but until the last year of its approach, because they can't hide it. They have to make it start appearing. We have too many anomalies in space, the perturbation of planets, tilting of of some of the axes of the planets, even Earth, the phenomena with the sun, the problems with our weather. There's only one common denominator that global warming doesn't explain any of this. Global warming does not change the weather patterns on Mars and all of the planets. All of the planets are heating up. The orbits are warped on some of our studies that show this. The orbits of comets and asteroids are warped. Global warming doesn't do that. Global warming doesn't change the tilt of the Earth or our magnetic north. These are phenomena dealing with an object in space. And this is clear when you study white paper reports. I'm not talking about internet YouTubers. I'm talking about actual scientific white paper reports. There is enough data. And there's 88 constellations viewed from Earth. All of the white paper reports and the data is firmly pointing to Sagittarius. That happens to be south of the universe. South of the universe is not polar south. Okay, that's called Nadar. Polar north is called zenith in white paper reports. The universe south is towards Sagittarius on the ecliptic. And that's where all white paper report studies showing perturbations, warped orbits of comets, asteroids. This is the same place where NASA sent the Pioneer and Voyager probes looking for Planet X. You can go back and look at these articles. They went silent after 1993, and guess what? They made instrument contact then. And so that's why they went silent. But you read all the articles before that. It tells you clearly what they're looking for. But they thought it had a normal circular, elliptical orbit around the sun. Yeah, it has an elliptical orbit, all right, but it's more like a comet or an asteroid. It crosses all our planets. It comes into our inner solar system, rounds the sun, and backs out. And it roughly has around a 360-year orbit, not a 3,600-year orbit. We can go back in history and plot multiple times. Even when we go with the ice core samples, looking at severe weather changes like the mini ice ages, the Mulder effect, all of these other ones. When this planet starts coming in, it affects our sun. Happens to be the same timing with the entry and exit. When we plot the aphelium and perihelium of the orbit, furthest distance and closest distance to the sun, we have something like a 85 to 90% match with the seasonal extremes that are shown on Earth's history in ice core samples. That's not an accident. You don't have these type of lineups with it being an accident.
Now, is this object then, and you did mention that it is coming from Sagittarius, but for those of us that are less astronomically studied, and we know, of course, the constellation Sagittarius, and you mentioned it is located as we look towards the southern hemisphere, in that direction, anyways. But as far as our inner solar system, has Planet X entered our Earth's inner solar system already, or it still hasn't entered? I know we've been, a lot of people have been talking about that for years now, that it was getting close, and then even some said it has already entered into our solar system. And the other thing I have researched, Gil, and I would like to hear your take on this, is that when it comes into our solar system and it crosses our solar system and then in an elliptical orbit, it crosses around the area between Mars and Jupiter, where the asteroid belt is located presently. Is that a myth? Is that there's some truth to that? Can you speak to that a bit?
Well, yes, it does come in. It goes all the way and crosses behind our sun and then exit out. It gets very close to the orbit of Mercury, okay, as it's making its round around the sun. It's just on the outside of Mercury, from what I can estimate at the moment. And we need a little bit more exact data. But the computer models showing us an exit and entry of 152 in 1/8 day of crossing Earth orbit twice. It's on Earth's planetary plane. Therefore, the entry and exit is on the ecliptic. You can look this up where the ecliptic is. It's the center line through the 12 sign that many people know as the zodiac. Okay, so in Hebrew that would have been called the Mezorah. It does cross through the debris field of a planet that used to exist between Mars and Jupiter. That we have a remnant of that planet we call Ceres. That was kind of the inner core that is still, I think it's a little bit smaller than our moon. And now it's a massive debris field. There used to be a planet there. This planet collided with Ceres, destroying it, shattering it. It slowed the planet down to 1/20th its normal speed. And then that's where the exodus occurred, where we had 3 days of darkness. Remember in Yeshua's time when he was on the cross, there was 3 hours of darkness. Remember, the moon's on the wrong side of Earth for Passover to have a solar eclipse. And we have historical documents outside the Bible that says both the sun and the moon were darkened. Okay, that means there's a third object. And it has to be larger. The moon can only give you 7.3 minutes of darkness. How do you get 3 hours? Except for another larger object that gives you 3 hours. But for that same object to give you 3 days of darkness during the Exodus, it had to have been traveling to like 1/20th of its normal speed. Well, guess what? How do we confirm that in a model? But when we put this in the model and we look at it carefully, we can tell, just like when NASA would send probes out and it would start to lose their speed, they would take that probe and they would let it pass close to the planet and they'd orbit it maybe 3 or 4 times. Then it would pick up its maximum speed because it's kind of like a slingshot effect. And then they'd dart it off to the next planet because it met its maximum speed. But this is exactly what we see that took place in the biblical records. It had slowed down to 1/20th. Now as it goes around the sun, it picks up a little bit of speed, but it takes 4 more trips before it reaches its normal speed again because of its mass. The mass allows it only to reach X distance and X speed. So right after the Exodus, it came back within 55 years. That meant it just took a small trip out into space and came back. It came back for Joshua's long day. This is the object that caused the Earth's rotation to slow down by 12 hours and caused a meteor shower that took out his enemy. Then it came at 121 years, which was Job, which was within 7 years of Ruth, the drought of Ruth. Remember, it was 10 years of drought. Then it took 297 years before it came to David and Saul. David and Saul mixed together had a drought of 7 years. This object passes mid of the drought. Then it took 358 years before it went to Hezekiah. And this is where the shadow went backwards on steps, not a sundown. Well, this is the exact sequence that would mirror, just like NASA would when they put a satellite probe gaining speed around a planet. It gains additional speed each pass to about 3 to 4 times. After that, it meets the maximum speed. We have this recorded, along with the other events of Earth's axis tilting, the meteor showers, Earth slowing down on it, the 7 years of drought or 10 years, like in Ruth, and many of the plagues that's listed in the Exodus.
I was just going to say, Gil, if I may just interject something here. You know, I've been praying about this, thinking about it for a long time. I mean, this has been going on since the 1990s, and there have been different people, different theories. Of course, you're familiar with the other theory of the 3,600 years, and there's other theories even that there's an object that comes every 1,000 years. And I've been thinking about all this for a long time, praying and asking the Lord to show me. And I wanted to ask you, I mean, could there be a possibility, and it's certainly possible, that we are dealing with multiple objects out there, celestial objects, Planet X, others have talked about a Planet 9. Scientists recently have mentioned that there are multiple brown dwarfs that they have seen and detected in outer space, not just one, but many of them. It could be possible that also some of these brown dwarfs and celestial objects do make a pass through our solar system. Some may come through maybe 1,000 years. This object, Planet 7X, comes every 360 years, and there's others that come maybe longer orbits, multiple 1,000 years. Do you think that is a possibility?
Knowing orbital mechanics and basic astronomy and stuff rules out many of these. Number one, the Planet 9 that they found is like 23 times further than Neptune. That's 700 astronomical units, okay? That's more than 3,600 years, okay? That's way, way out there. Two, the orbital path that they're projecting doesn't even come inside Neptune's orbit, much less any of our other planets. It's circling our solar system in an elliptical orbit. Even in its closest path would be very difficult to see. Very difficult to see. All right? These other objects that they found, these Oort cloud objects, most of these protoplanets are smaller than our moon, and none of those really cross any. None of those are a threat to Earth. The problem that I have with this one that we're looking at, we have clear records throughout history. We have a model that works with the 360. Everything, we have clear data, and we have a real object that is a possible, I don't want to use the threat, but a major disturbance to Earth. It has been in its past. It will be in its future. We're showing clear indications of its approach when you know what to look for scientifically. Global warming does not explain these phenomena that scientists are studying. Nowhere near. Don't even come close. But these other objects are distractions. They have no validity in a threat or disturbance to Earth. The 3,600 years also does not work out. That for an object to have a 36-year orbit, you'd have to have an object that's 3 to 4 times the size of Jupiter. Well, let me give it. Now, some people say the Bible doesn't have data. Yes, it does have data. It's whether or not you believe it. But I can tell you all of the past historical events, it follows the exact model in sequence and everything. Now, will the book of Revelation give us a futuristic, what it says for the future? Can it be accounted on? I think so, since it has such a past, since the past records are so exact, I can't find an error in it. It gives me great concern for what it's telling us for the future. It says that our destruction by fiery hail would be no more than an hour. It'll be within an hour, it says. So that cannot be over an hour. Well, Earth travels 8.4 Earth diameters, I believe it is, per hour. Earth diameter is roughly 7,800 or so miles across. Well, at the angle that it comes in around March and April, means that this object cannot be larger than 6.6 diameters of Earth. All right? Also, the 3 hours of darkness for Yeshua gives us a range. Okay? And I roughly use an object roughly 6.5 to 7 times the diameter of Earth is what I used. I don't like calling this object 6.66, so that's why I call it Planet 7. But it's no larger than that. It can be anywhere from 5 to 7. Like, in other words, like if it's a steel ball, it could even be smaller than 5 meter diameters. But that's not in the realistic realm of density. It could be, but it's the least likely. So we're looking for something that's similar to Earth, let's say, in mass or heavier. We know that it plowed into Ceres and survived. Ceres is shattered, but yet this planet continued on. So we know it's dense.
It's denser, right?
Yes.
It's much denser than Earth.
It's a high probability. The denser it will be for 360-year orbit, the smaller the diameter will be. So that's why I'm giving a diameter anywhere from 5 to 7, somewhere in there. If it's a gas giant, of some type, then it could be 7, because visually you would count the gas blanket, but it doesn't count on the orbital. It doesn't really add much to the orbital mass. So orbital mechanics tells us a lot on what it is not. It is not a 3,600-year orbit because it would cross Earth's orbit 4 times if it was on the planetary plane, not twice. The Bible clearly indicates multiple times it passes on Earth's planetary plane twice. Book of Revelation gives us 2 separate meteor showers, one in CO 6, one in CO 7, and they're 5 months apart. Well, remember Noah's flood? He clearly warned us that the end days, the book of Revelation is referring, it will be very similar to Noah's flood, and what's the other one? The time of Lot.
Right.
Well, they found the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah recently, and they were destroyed by either a comet or a meteor that is exploded over those 2 towns. They found Trinidite at these 2 sites. Well, the only other time we can find Trinidite is at a nuclear test site where the heat is so hot it turns the sand to glass. Well, they found this Trinidite also at Sodom and Gomorrah. This is where an object explodes over the sky, just like, remember the one that exploded over Russia. They were very lucky that it was that 4 or 5 miles or whatever miles it was high. If it would have exploded closer to the Earth, you'd have people vaporized there, just like Lot's wife. Lot's wife was vaporized on the second event, leaving her shadow cast onto the stone. That happened in Japan during World War II when they dropped the nuclear device.
Right.
It vaporized people, leaving their shadow. You can still see those shadows today. And keep in mind, it's man's description that said she was turned to stone, not God saying, I'm going to turn her to stone. It's man's description because they don't have a word for vaporization. They didn't even know what happened to her. They could just see the outliner on the stone or on the salt.
A similar thing could have happened also, couldn't it, Gil, during the Exodus, when we read about the scripture about the killing of the firstborn in Egypt. There are some historical facts back there. If I have read it in different times, that the account that they have shared is that some of them people that were killed, the firstborn, were killed in sort of a meteor shower that came down that night of the darkness. There is nothing really solid that we can use to prove that, but there have been some kind of reports out there. If people search it, it's out there somewhere. And it is very possible, if it is the same event that took place during the Exodus, if that event is the same event as Planet 7X during previous time it crossed the Earth's orbit, it is very possible. Do you think that could have been the same thing, the same object during the Exodus, or do you think that was something different?
Without a doubt it is. There are certain hallmarks that the Bible keys in on. If you see a double eclipse, or hear written in the text, a double eclipse, keep in mind, you can only have one eclipse at a time in the natural. But the Bible clearly mentions double eclipses multiple times. The sun and moon are going dark at the same time. It would say the sun is dark and the moon is blood red. Blood red means, in their terms, an eclipse. You cannot have a double eclipse because one creates the other one. It takes the moon to create a solar eclipse, not both at the same time. It takes a third object to cause a double eclipse. This is mentioned multiple times in the Bible. Along with that, you see a 7-year drought on average. The only time it was longer, it was Ruth. Then you read about fiery hail. Fiery hail is their way of describing a meteor shower. They didn't have the word meteor yet, okay? Hail means any object falling from the sky. Okay? They said fiery hail, that is meteor shower. It'll talk about strange effects with the rivers. We're going to see that again. You're going to start to see rivers drying up or landslides into the river where the rivers would turn red. You'll see plagues. During severe droughts, certain type of insects like locusts are more abundant because of the temperatures are ideal for them. And it's like remember, a plague back then. Today, we think of a plague only as a disease. A plague in the Bible means anything that harms normal society. If it's attacking the cattle, or if it's a locust eating the crops, if it's a drought, if that plague means something negative affecting the whole group. So keep that in mind. Words have different meanings whenever you come into modern time versus ancient time. And it is clear when we use the same model that we found in the Asian records of 1054, the supernova 1054. This is the white paper report. Let me get the name of it. It's the reevaluation of the Eastern and Western records of the supernova 1054. And what this white paper tells us is that the supernova was seen a couple months earlier. It was documented, but this part of the study clearly indicates this is not a supernova. This large object that they were observing moved through multiple constellations. Well, supernova is stationary. And they observed this object for 26 months. Naked eye observation. They didn't have a telescope yet. 13 months coming in, 13 months leaving. Well, if any amateur astronomer out there and professional knows for a fact, for you to see an object for that long with your naked eye, that has to be a large planet or a large comet, something very large. Because a normal comet, you might see it for a month or two at the max, not 26 months. It has to take a large object to be able to reflect that much light for that period of time. And when we plot the orbit, because they're giving us enough information, and I came out with about 152 and 1/8 day entry and exit. The exit is in the month of Passover. Okay, that's around the end of March, beginning of April, where it exits at. And I take that same model and I bring it into the biblical records and overlay the sequence of events that they're describing, the slowing down of Earth, the 3 hours of darkness for Yeshua. Remember, this object can pass behind Earth or in front of Earth. It gives us two sets of effects. For like Hezekiah, it passed behind us. It only caused the tilt. There was no meteor shower. Earth tilted 26 to 28 degrees. Remember Joseph of Egypt, when they had that severe drought. This object passes mid of the 7 years. That's 3.5 years in. Guess what? The skies bowed to him. We have it documented in the Nibiru disk of Germany, where the literal skies are bowing to him because Earth is tilting 26 to 28 degrees. Same amount of degrees that happened to Hezekiah's time.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you. I know Larry has a question regarding the trajectory of Planet X. Larry, do you have a question for Gil?
Well, I was going to ask him by chance, Stan Dale and others claim to have information that this object speeds up and slows down. In other words, it's not a constant momentum, but apparently something is adjusting the momentum as it travels. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I just wanted to mention that and see if he was aware of that or if he thought that was true. And then I had another follow-up question that just came to mind after that.
Anybody that knows physics that would know they just violated one of the laws of physics right there. Planets do not speed up per se. Keep in mind, as it's going closer to Earth, it has a constant rate of speed of it's increasing. As it goes away, then it slows down. But it's not gonna. that is calculable. You can calculate how much it's going to increase in its speed going towards Earth. It's not going to just sit there in the middle of space right there, decide, okay, I'm not going to follow the laws of physics. I'm going to slow down, and I'm going to fool you. I'm going to move right, left, no, all of this jazz. The laws of conservation of energy, look, for even a planet, there's certain people that wrote books that Mars jumped orbit, interfered with Earth in the past, and then jumped back into its orbit. Some say it was Mars. Some say it's Venus that jumped. Well, show me evidence on how a planet gets the additional energy it needs to break its magnetic hold on where it is in its trough, come interfere with us, then have enough energy to go back to its place. Where's the generators connected to this planet that gives it the extra energy? These people who are making these statements they're violating laws of physics. So I say no, that is not right. And if you can give me a visual, but they can't give me a visual. There's all of these so-called sightings that they're showing are either lens flares, Photoshop fakes, atmospheric phenomena. When it's going to be real, there's 2 to 3 million amateur astronomers out there that the government cannot control these people. They have the professionals control because of licensing. Amateurs, if someone would give coordinates and say, here it is, or just say it's in Sagittarius or where, you would have hundreds of photos, close-up photos, of a planet that you would recognize as not one of our known planets. It will either look like a comet, or it's going to look like, you probably see the surface of it. If it's closer than Jupiter, then it will start to have a glow, like most comets will. It will start to make its own light. But if it's beyond that, you can actually see, the crater shapes and, whatever atmosphere. If it had one, you would see characteristics that would tell you you're looking at a totally different planet. And we have not sighted it yet. There is no sighting in the public realm at this time. May have something in the government realm, but there's nothing in the public realm right now. It does not mean that this object is not real because there's too much data pointing to a real object. We have all the effects of it. We know where it's coming from. We have historical documents that correlate with a real model. And I'm quoting astrophysicist Tyson, exactly what his quote is on what science is. If we take observed phenomena, bring it into the laboratory and show that it's repeatable, that's science in astronomy. We take the observed phenomena in the Bible. We have a model. It's repeatable 14 times in the Bible. We have a real object. We only needed 2 sightings of the past to figure out that Halley's Comet was coming back in a timely fashion. That was only 2. We have 14. I wish this object wasn't true. I stayed a skeptic for the longest time that I could until I had no more footing to stand on as a skeptic. I know exactly what a skeptic mind is thinking about on this object because I was there. But there's white paper reports, there's data, and we have overlapping evidence, and there's first-hand accounts in historical documents and biblical records that I can show 3 artifacts that give us the exact date when it passed, within an hour of its passing. The Nibiru, there's a disc from Nineveh that I show in my charts. That was the time of Jonah's warning. Gives the exact date. That was a 40-day warning. Gives us the exact date when it crossed Joseph of Egypt. We have another one on the ceiling in Egypt, where that gives us the year and the date of Job's problem. Read these stories. Look at these stories through an eye of an astronomer on the events that they're describing, like Job's trouble. His entire flocks of camel, sheep, and the shepherds were totally consumed where there was no evidence of their bodies even. And a great wind, which is the concussion wave, hit the house that his daughters and sons were celebrating in, which is around Passover, and the house collapsed on them. Go read Job again. Go read these stories and look at it through the eyes of an astronomer and tell me what you find. Overwhelming evidence. How do you get a double eclipse when it's impossible without a third object? We have a real object. I hate to say it. We have a real object. It has a rough estimate of an orbit of 360 years. And we're presently showing the signs of approach on Earth of this object in multiple ways. Global warming is a farce. We have global changes caused by this planet, but it's not CO2. Mars is warming up. Last time I checked, there's no cars on Mars. So how can it be CO2 warming it up?
And I have a second question, too, a follow-up, and I apologize. I didn't send it in. This just came as you were talking. If you remember, Malachi Martin at one time warned about the Griffith Observatory, and that the Vatican was using the Griffith Observatory to watch for an inbound object. And then later on, Tom Horn, I think about a year or so ago, actually went to the Griffith Observatory and was shown some data, where they're using the Lucifer device, and they were watching something on a constant basis. And do you have any knowledge of that, or would that be involving your Planet 7A?
I have supporting evidence to that. I don't have those. I can't testify for those exact points. When I published my information, I had a retired NASA engineer that contacted me. He also worked for the Office of Naval Research. He was one of the designers and the engineers that worked on that Lucifer device. Remember, the Lucifer is not the telescope itself, it's the electronic package attached to it. And that sensitivity of that object can measure up to 1 photon of light. It's not, if you go read the old data, they changed that. They don't tell you that it's that accurate. That came online shortly after NASA went silent in December 1992. The Vatican telescope came online in 1993. This gentleman also made the first objects, infrared objects cameras that he made were smaller ones. One went to Dr. Harrington in New Zealand. Another one, a lady somewhere in the U.S. That he helped mount it to her telescope. And he asked her, he says, what are we doing today? As far as what are we taking pictures of? She says, we're receiving signals from probes, and we're going to coordinate where to aim this camera. But at that time, he didn't put 2 and 2 together, knowing that it was the Pioneer and Voyager probe. He said after he saw my data, the way it overlapped, that all these different projects that he worked in connected the dots for him, that they were looking for this object. As they clearly stated in articles, during the launch, and by the time it reached out there, it took like 16 years for it to reach the designated point they were reaching. They're clearly stating that they were looking for this outer planet that's called Planet X. Well, they went silent December 1992 because their instrument they had triangulated the position, and it didn't have a circular orbit around the sun. It had extreme elliptical orbit heading towards the sun. Well, that made it a possible threat because it was on the ecliptic. Ecliptic means Earth planetary plane. They went silent after that point until they could study it further. This is where the Vatican, the government, what is the government giving the most advanced infrared instrument to a private entity like a religious organization? Can anybody explain that to me? And they had verified it as well on pictures. Malachi Martin is correct. There is an object. He just didn't have the date on. Keep in mind, the way he stated it was from a viewpoint of an astronomer. He said on that year, how did he say it? It will be validated maybe in a certain year. Well, that's when it reaches the edge of our solar system where normal telescopes could reach. This was before Reagan putting up the, or he didn't know about the laser system that Reagan and them were putting up there. In the 80s, Reagan started the process of developing large enough lasers to be able to block our view, to cloak it. And because the Bible indicates to us in the book of Revelation, we'll have a short warning, maybe 6 to 9 months at the most. Well, that's not a realistic point of view in modern time if no one's interfering with our view. We should have 16 years of warning. At the edge of our solar system to the sun takes 16 years for the normal travel. Kepler's laws of planetary motion with 360-year orbit would take 16 years to reach the sun. The Bible clearly indicates we're not going to have 16-year warning. Why is that? Again, the Bible is indicating something very correct because it's there. We can see the effects of it. We just can't view it yet, but we will. And I even indicate people can download the information for free. I put estimates for 2021. This is 2020 and 2021, as the book of Revelation says. The crossing of this planet will happen in a time frame when the moon is at the foot of Virgo in the nighttime skies, not the daytime skies. Yeshua comes mid of night, okay? And it's going to be the first taking away is during Passover. Second taking away is during September. That's where everybody's taken up. There's two different taking aways. One says a remnant, and you go into the wilderness, and it's only the living. The third taking away say all believers, the dead are first, and you're going to heaven. They're qualified completely different. One is on the last trump, one is at Passover. This is called a greater exodus. Well, the word in the Bible says greater. That means there was a minor exodus. That was the one coming out of Egypt was the minor. So clearly go back and look at the qualifiers. It's in the text. You got to go read it clearly.
I'll jump in here and ask you a question because you mentioned a couple of things that are very interesting, and that is that scene that Apostle John sees in Revelation 12 where he sees the vision with the woman with the cloak with the sun and the moon at her feet. And, of course, that is an astronomical depiction of the skies as seen by John. And we didn't start to see it like that until recently. In recent years, of course, prophecy teachers used to, attribute all kinds of prophetic symbolism to that. But it's only in recent years, as science has advanced, that we and more people have been looking at the skies and using astronomical software that we have become aware that this sort of event happened at the birth of the Messiah. And it's probably going to happen right prior to the second return of the Lord. And this event just happened last year during the month of September. And I was, there was a lot of rumors about that, and there was a lot of buzz on the internet about that event, which it's something that is very, very rare. It does not happen that often. It happens only every several thousand years, that exact event like that. There are some other events that resemble, but not that exact event like it happened this last September. And so I was just going to ask you about that. Could the event that happened this last September, I believe it was September 23rd, could that have been, and by the way, it happened on a very symbolic day of Rosh Hashanah, very, very interesting, and right on the Sabbath. I mean, it's incredible the parallels. If anything else, the parallels that took place. Could that have anything to or could that? Let me rephrase that. Could that be? Do you think prophetically speaking to us about the the possible arrival of this object and the return of the Lord, the day of the Lord, and so forth. Do you think, can you speak to that a bit? Because I know there was a big buzz in this last few months about that, and nothing happened.
There is many aspects that I'd have to address on that, many. One, for instance, you had said, is there any thing in the Bible that refers to it? Yes. There's not to be mixed up. He said, I will show false signs as well as true signs. You know, he says in the end days, I'll show you a sign in the sky for his return. And for the disbelievers, I will give them false signs. Look, he's coming mid of night, he said. This visual is going to be mid of night around the opposite side. Okay? In a Passover event. Elijah and them have to appear at Passover. Elijah, there's two prophets. 3.5 days after that will be the crossing of this planet, where you see first the moon at the foot of Virgo, then the light rays of the tail of this comet illuminating only Virgo, as it says. The sun illuminates all of the constellations. Okay? Then, as it's moving continuously, it will start to appear, which is the fiery dragon of old, they call that. In ancient terminology, comets were called fiery swords, fiery dragons, demon, multiple things. They had the Egyptians gave them name Isis, Horus. The Romans gave them name Jupiter, and a few other ones. Okay, it's throughout history. If you look at what was taking place at the time, the major droughts, when did they start naming these things? It's when this planet came around. Because remember, they didn't even have the word planet yet. They used the term wandering star. Okay. Then when it was a major event, they would name it. And that's it. That's how we got the name. Then they gave it a human figure. Then later on, the emperors and pharaohs saying that they were descendants of these gods because they wanted more power to the people, or to make the people think they had more power than they did. They would claim to be the descendants of this entity. This is, and it still goes on in some form today even. But the zodiac is read with the daytime skies. That's the occult version of the Mezarah. The Mezarah is read in the nighttime skies. They're 180 degrees out of sync. When do you see Virgo in the nighttime sky? That's March, April, around Passover today. 2,000 years ago, it had been Libra, the scales of judgment and payment. Guess what? During Yeshua's sacrifice, in the skies, nighttime was the proof that you were judged and the payment is done in full. It was Libra. In our time today, it's because every 2,000 years, the constellations move over one. Earth's rotation, everything changes that. So even anybody in the zodiac, when you read your sign in the paper, you're reading the wrong sign. It's 1 year, it's 1 month off now after 2,000 years. So they're looking in the wrong sky, they're using the wrong interpretation, they're blending the occult with what they're doing. With the timing they're off on their timing. The timing of the last trump is in September. But go back and read your Bible. There's 2 taking aways. The last taking away is during September when nobody knows the day or the hour. So if you're not supposed to know the day and hour, what do you look? That's not the sign in the sky he's talking about. It's the first taking away. When Elijah and them appears. Remember, Elijah and them are here on earth for 3.5 years. With that half, you look on the calendar, it gives you exactly 6 months difference between when the prophets show up and when the prophets leave. See, the 2 prophets are dead at the end, and then they're resurrected with the dead. That's on the last trump.
Well, we're going to take a short break, Gil, right now, and a special interview with Gil BROUSSARD, and we also have Larry Taylor and Chuck Wilson with us. And there's a lot of things that that the people want to know, Gil. And one of the things that has been going on recently, affecting the weather, affecting, we had all these horrific hurricanes last year. Now we are having this horrific winter. And now you got the mudslides in California, you got the fires, you got then strange temperatures, like in some areas of Antarctic, the temperatures are actually warmer than some states in the U.S. And this is unheard of. This is we have never seen things like this. Like I have been living here in this property where I live in North Florida for over 25 years, and we have had the coldest winter ever. It got so cold that everything froze solid for about 2 days. I have a little water bird bath outside my window, and it was frozen solid for 2 days. It has never happened, never. We have had the temperatures go down, during the night, below freezing, but then during the day it went back up. We live in Florida, after all, the Sunshine State, and things like that is just not normal, and yet it happened. And so sharks frozen in the ocean. They at least there were at least 4 reports of sharks. I mean, frozen in the water. Lizards in Miami falling off the trees, frozen. Just weird stuff going on, and so I was just wondering, Gil, is this object affecting the Earth's rotation? Actually, is it getting close enough now? Do you, in your estimation, that is beginning to affect the Earth's rotation, and maybe the Earth is beginning to slow down a bit? There have been reports by scientific communities that they say the Earth is slowing down a little bit and is beginning to do a little wobble. Could this be telling us that this object is approaching and is getting closer?
Okay, there's 2 different issues. One is the tilt, and one is the rotation of Earth. The rotation of Earth since 1820. We know that in 1820 we had an exact 24-hour day, but since then it's been slowing down according to their calculations and everything. That it's 1.4 millisecond per every 100 years. So right now we're 2.5 milliseconds off. Okay, so to give you for instance, how many milliseconds is there in a whole year? Because they're talking about the year being off this. Well, there's 31,556,908,800 milliseconds in a year, and we're off 2.5 milliseconds. That's insignificant to claim that this is done by planet. But now the other issue, tilt of the Earth. We have, that is a qualifier. How do we know it's a qualifier? Well, you can go to a website, I'll have to spell it out, it's vizaurad.com/axis-drift HTML. And they'll show the 6 years of recording the Earth's wobble, the tilt, Now, to the average person, they may not see a problem with this, but I see a significant issue. Our tilt is greater in the summertime than it is in the wintertime. And that direction that it's given us on the dates on this, which is July 9th or so, where it meets the maximum tilt of 4 degrees off, 4 to 5 degrees off on its tilt. Earth's tilt is leaning towards Sagittarius. That's where the maximum tilt is, looking at the data. This is exactly where we would expect it to be if we had an inbound object. Okay? Opposite poles attract. This is a magnetic universe, not a gravity-ruled universe. The physicists are more correct than astronomers are on what's ruling the universe. Okay? Only a physicist model correctly describes, and we can estimate the effects to Earth, and that qualifies Joshua's long day of being real. We have a model that proves Earth's rotation slowed down by 12 hours, followed by a fiery hail, meteor shower. The tilt is off. Earth's wobble is extreme on the around July, and that's where the tilt of Earth is tilted much more towards this object which is coming in. That's an indicator. It's just like a compass needle, all right, pointing to where the magnetic field is. Earth itself is, just like many of the other planets are showing indications of that also. Another indicator, if you want, is why do we have more meteors coming into Earth's atmosphere? Many multiples. I don't know the exact multiple, otherwise I'd quote it. But you can find a graph that shows it's just exponential in rise. Why all of a sudden we're getting additional meteors? Because the magnetic fields warp the orbits of the comets and asteroids. Their orbits are not in the same path. They're warped either to the right, to the left, down, up. They're warped. And now these orbital paths used to miss Earth are now crossing Earth's path. And now they're entering Earth's atmosphere. Question to be asked is, what's warping their path? Another magnetic field.
So this kind of wobble that we're talking about, this could be having an effect on the temperatures of the Earth as it wobbles.
Without a doubt. Yeah, without a doubt.
If you take the globe of the Earth, and of course we are calling it a globe on purpose. You know, there's a furor out there about a flat Earth, and some people believe that, and they're welcome to believe it if they want, but that goes against all physics.
Any person that wishes to believe in a flat Earth can, if they contact somebody on the equator, okay, on the equator, not near, and have them take a long exposure. Remember, you don't have to be a professional astronomer. You don't have to be an amateur astronomer. But you have to be a photographer of some form to where you know how to set a long-term exposure of about a half hour or more. You don't have to do the 6 hours. You point it towards the north, and then you point one towards the south, then you point one straight up. And what this does, the stars will cause a crease of light that will, in the north and south, it'll draw an arc, one in the opposite rotation of the other one. When you look straight up from the equator, you're going to see a straight line that tells you have two axes. A flat Earth only has one, okay? Now, remember what science is. Science is not theory. Science is what you can prove, what you can witness. Witness with your own eye, okay? This can be disproven quite easily. Only thing you have to do is take the time to hit a shutter on a camera. So you're being deceived by people who do not put the entire formula up that would make their theory fall apart. They're holding back data for you. Therefore, it's very convincing. But they're holding back data.
Well, my take on that is very simple, Gil, and that is, anyone that knows a little bit about physics and thermodynamics and astronomy, that it falls right by the wayside real quick. But the point I was making was that as the Earth wobbles, and the wobble is getting pretty, is beginning to increase as we get closer and closer to this object. We're talking about events here like that movie, The Day After, aren't we? We're talking about large areas of the globe freezing solid, and other areas so hot that they're burning. And because of this extreme wobble. And the other thing I think could affect that this wobble could have an effect on, and again, I am not a physicist or astronomer, so I can only speak only so much to this, but wouldn't that also have an impact on the winds, on the jet streams, which is what we are seeing? We are seeing an impact on the jet streams, and we're beginning to see, like this winter storm that just came by here, the winds are 60, 70 miles an hour on the winter, which is unheard of. So all these bizarre things are taking place, and I just wanted to share that with you and have you address it, because I do believe that this is being caused, this extreme wobble, and all these other things as a result of it is being caused by this approach of the Planet 7X.
We have multiple points that would be qualifiers. Remember, there's only one common denominator, and I agree with you that this is the effects of an approaching planet. But when we combine the effects that we see off our planet, the orbits of comets being warped, the orbits of asteroids being warped, the tilt, the magnetic north, the effects we see on the other planets, all the planets are warming up. Then we combine the sinkholes on Earth, the natural disasters that are exponential in curve and magnitude and size, and we're looking at the earthquakes rising like the pains of a woman giving birth. That's biblical. We're seeing it. It's not climaxed yet. That's what greatly concerns me, because that means it's going to get much higher in its intensity and frequency. Volcanic mixed activity, that's at an all-time high as well. We have look, we used to get maybe 2 or 3 in a whole year, all right, maybe. Now we get 23 in a day, drastic rise. And one of the numbers that they're not telling you, there's only maybe about 1,200 volcanoes that's on our crust, as far as on the continents. But there's 3,400,000 volcanoes under the ocean. If you take the same percentage on how many are active above ground and apply that to the numbers underneath the ocean, that's where you get your El Nino and your La Nina effect. These vents are warming up the ocean in the most active area of the Pacific, and that's affecting our climates. All of these things together are causing the extremes. It's not one. So it's all of them combined. When you change the tilt of the Earth, when you change the magnetic field of the Earth, when you change how many volcanoes are going off, when you change, the water table, therefore there's not as much absorption into the sky, then that causes the government to seed clouds more to keep the crop belt moving, to offset a drought. Because one thing is quite common, if there's a drastic change in food prices or food starts to get scarce in any form, you're going to have riots in the streets. That's what started the riot in Egypt. That started the whole thing, because the government was not keeping up with the subsidies that was offsetting the price and the rise of food. And that brought the average worker to the streets. You're going to see more of this. You're going to see more extremes on the weather. You're going to see one of the qualifiers, if we're right, now look, I said in the past, a lot of people misquote me, because there's one particular pastor that said, I said it's going to happen in 2016 or 17. Go look at my videos, not his videos. You see that I say it greatly concerns me. Greatly concerns does not mean saying it will happen. If I have a visual, then I'll tell you, okay, it's going to happen this Passover, whatever. That's not there yet. We have to have a sighting. I even qualified that in the videos that I produce. People like to warp what I say. I'm trying to be very exact in what I'm telling people. No exaggeration. This is the data is there. Don't need to be exaggerating. The data speaks for itself. I just have to qualify science for people, what physics is, what astronomy is, what orbital mechanics are, why it's important. You need to teach Daniel 101 in the Bible as well, where he studied the stars. We've gotten away from the Almighty's calendar. He says he'll give us a sign in the sky. We now know what the sign is. It's the approaching planet. That'll look like a comet. A star at first, then a comet. Then only the last week to week and a half will it get visually threatening or scary to people. So just like the Bible says, and all the way to the end, they'll be partying and taking, marriage and everything like that, because they're not concerned.
Yeah.
Because visually, it doesn't get large visually. It has to close half of its distance to where it doubles in visual. Like when it's from the sun to us, it has to get half the distance before it even doubles as a star. It'll be just a larger star. Then it has to go and cut that distance in half again. So we have, I'm not sure if I answered your question, though. Kind of might have got off track here.
Yeah, sort of. You hit a couple of areas there, and which is what I have always believed, that as these weather patterns become more erratic, either colder or hotter, the seasonal changes to grow food throughout the world is going to change dramatically, and absolutely. So that explains part of the problem we are facing. Well, regarding the last thing that you were talking about, Gil, I did get an email from Randy. He wanted to ask you. He said, I'm a purchaser of your CD package, and your Planet X 7X prediction was obviously wrong, or at least the timing was miscalculated. And so I believe you touched on that a little bit, but he says, please succinctly explain why, Randy.
We had the moon at the foot of Virgo, okay? That was one of the qualifiers that night during Passover. It happened to be a Sabbath year and a Jubilee year. It was 2016 and 2017. Because we had 70 years from the time Israel entered the land, because I can calculate these now because I have a astronomical event that gives me dates. I have 3 artifacts that lines up with the biblical stories that gives me dates. I can calculate when they went into when they entered Israel, the promised land, and that gave us to where that was the 70th year and the 70th Jubilee. Okay, it was the 70th Jubilee. We know associated that it's either that's the starting point. It will be within the 70th Jubilee of the return of the Messiah, within that time frame. But it gave me great concern that it was on it because the moon was at the foot of Virgo. The only thing we needed now is the sight, inbound comet, and the fiery dragon of old. I told people almost 3 to 4 months before that, said there's no sighting of this. This is obviously not going to be the year. We have to have a sighting. Remember, we have to be watchmen on the wall, not prophets on the wall. People are still looking for a prophet. We have to be watchmen, it said. He'll give us a sign in the sky. Now, the next time the moon is at the foot of Virgo in the nighttime skies in March or April, it's 2020, 2021. Since then, we have an additional qualifier I was able to find. This thing passes mid of the 7-year drought. Remember when the 2 prophets come, they bring 3.5-year drought with them? That's the last half of the 7. So the crossing is mid of the drought. That means we should see, if 2021 or 20 is it, we should see a 3.5-year drought prior to that of global significance. Start to phase in. It won't be as severe on the first year as it will the last year. The last year would be extremely severe. So right now, last year in September or November, there was a 7 to 9 mile stretch of the Mississippi that dried up or got low enough where barge traffic that moving grain couldn't pass. And we checked the other rivers in the world, the Euphrates, the Tigris, the Nile. They were all showing record lows, historic record lows. They were under a drought phase. Well, if we see from September to this next September the rising of food prices and the severities in the river levels, guess what? That might just be the beginning of the global drought that the Bible is talking about. Mid of the 7 would bring us in. Right now, it would be 2021. Again, I will state it the same way I stated in the past. It greatly concerns me. That does not mean it would definitely happen. Definitely happen is when I have a sighting of it. Then I can qualify what the government was telling us. And just lately, there's a law that's been passed that amateur astronomers are not allowed to inform the public if they spot an asteroid without it going through this agency that qualifies whether or not they want to tell the public or not. You can be thrown in prison now.
Yeah.
So if we see this planet, it's going to have to be to each church. The churches, the groups, have to have their own little astronomer, amateur astronomer. If he sees it, you're going to have to do it word of mouth within the church. Otherwise, that person could go to jail.
Yeah, they're tightening the screws, no doubt, on the amateur astronomers. They don't want anybody leaking any information out there without their consent. Now, there's this other phenomena that is taking place, and I know Larry and I have talked about it on some programs, and that is the water retreating from oceans. Like recently, it happened in Ecuador. Last year, it happened in Chile. It's happened in Argentina. Basically, where that is, the water in the oceans just retreats, and for miles. And that is not because of drought. There is some other physical, phenomena taking place there that is affecting these events for the water to just disappear. Do you want to talk to that, or do you have any other questions, Larry, associated with this?
Well, I do have one, Augusto. We have that water, but also I live in a mountainous region up in southeast Oklahoma, right on the Arkansas-Oklahoma border, and we've been having some real anomalies the last, especially 6 months and basically a year. We're having anomalies of electromagnetism, it seems like. There's a lot of iron up in this area, and we have a lot of winds up in this area, but it seems like the satellite television, internet, cell phones, even our own electricity, a lot of times it glitches or it goes off. You have anomalies you can't explain, and they can't explain them. And then later it's back on, and then even you watching your satellite TV and you see problems with sound, problems with visual at times, off and on. And is the incoming particularly, is some of the perturbations possibly electromagnetic and affecting not only the satellites, but also ground-based electromagnetic frequencies?
Yes, the norms are changing. We're exceeding our higher limits in different spectrums. Remember, this is why they're testing the grid. They're trying to prepare for like an EMP to where we won't go completely dead anymore. Because whether it's a sun flare or whether or not when we enter the tail of this comet, that's like a massive EMP. The whole world has to be shut down, not just a country, the whole world. Every electrical facility and every electronic device has to be shielded or shut down. If it's turned on at the time, it will fry. So you can look at it considering it like the 3 days of darkness, but it's not necessarily dark per se, as in, because the side facing the tail, you're going to have the body of the planet will block out the sun, but you're going to have this aurora that comes down from the North Pole all the way down to the equator, as well as the southern aurora going to the equator. You're going to have massive colors, and it's going to howl like a trumpet. When the aurora is that intense, you're going to hear sounds. It'll sound spooky if you don't know the reason. If you don't know the reason why you're hearing this, If you don't realize that it's the planet, you think the whole Earth is moaning, like it's going through a massive, we have to get educated on what to expect here. This is the Bible. There's a quote in the Bible that scares me the most. It says, "This is the worst event in all of Earth's history." And knowing, I'm confident that Noah's flood happened, and that is not the worst. This next one is. Remember, the book of Revelation was written roughly around the time of the period of Yeshua, 2,000 years ago. Well, this planet passed 5 times since then. It wasn't passing close to Earth. It passed through our orbit. Therefore, we only had seasonal effects. The earthquakes and the droughts, some meteor showers, whatever. But there was no tilting. There was no slowing down of Earth. We didn't have electronics yet. The book of Revelation is talking about our time right now, because it says, when Israel was formed in one day, that generation shall not die out before all is fulfilled. How did they get that right?
Now, what would happen hypothetically, Gil, if this when this object comes closer to the Earth? It could affect the rotation of the Earth, where the Earth could literally stop rotating, or at least slow down so much that there could be some effect on the gravity of the Earth. There was a FEMA commercial that came out, I think it was a couple of years ago, that about that very same thing. And in this FEMA commercial, you could see, a family, and the family, all of a sudden, the lamps started, rising to the ceiling, and all that kind of stuff. And so could that hypothetically be something that may happen?
Now we're going to stretch the outer bounds of possibility, okay? Since none of us here live through one of these, and this is going to be theoretical, let's separate the two. One is gravity and one is magnetic, okay? I feel that gravity is associated with how dense the mass of an object is. It has nothing to do that it doesn't create its own gravity. I mean, it's self-evident to its mass, okay? It's not going to be influenced by another mass, not in that way. Now, the magnetic fields, opposite fields attract, okay? And similar fields repulse each other. So whatever north pole of this planet and whatever south pole, remember, where our compass points to is north, that's actually the south magnetic pole, where the north needle is pointing to. Remember, north has to be the opposite for it to attract. So that's literally the magnetic south. So if the magnetic north and the south of these two objects get in close proximity, they'll tilt towards each other. Guess what? 26 to 28 degrees would be the norm. It has in the past. Okay, now but before that, Earth will start to go through, about 3 days prior to the arrival, will start to enter the plasma tail slowly. And within 3 days, we're smack dab in the middle of it. So they got to shut off all generators at least 3 to 3.5 days prior to us going, before we start into the plasma tail. Otherwise, you'll burn up generators, planes will fall out of the sky, and so on, because your electronics won't work. Ships would be lost and everything. So and then that is going to drown out or overpower our magnetic, our energy from the sun going into our north and south pole that causes Earth to rotate. So it's just like turning a dimmer switch. It gets, our rotational speed will get less and less and less, and we'll come to a complete stop. It's not like slamming on the brakes. That's not the way it happens. That's not the way it happened in Joshua's long day. That's not the way it's going to happen in Revelation as well. We're going to come to a gradual stop within a 3-day period. Then the target zone, and it says, will be off by 12 hours, exactly like Joshua's long day. That means the target zone, the astronomers will predict the wrong half of the Earth being hit, because they're using a gravity-ruled universe. This model only works on a physicist model of a magnetically ruled universe. 2 different models. The physicist model was just proven out when comet Siding Springs passed near Mars. it gave electrical discharge. Remember, astronomers say the tail of a comet is ice particles. Well, ice particles are not going to give you any type of effect, much less light up the entire planet of Mars. There was electrical discharge between. Earth is going to go through the tail of this object. Remember where he says, I send the 4 angels to hold back the winds in the book of Revelation?
Right.
Well, how are the winds created? From the rotation of Earth. How do you stop the wind? Stop the rotation.
That kind of is talking about the rotation, something affecting the rotation of the Earth, and basically depicted there as the angels holding back the wind. Now, if that were to happen, and again, we are just speculating. We are going right now. We're, in our minds, just asking questions of what could possibly happen. Okay, because it has never happened. But this is going to be an event unlike any other, as you stated.
Correct.
Never before happened anything like this. Now, there are 2 possibilities here, Gil, and that is if the Earth comes to a standstill or the rotation is severely reduced to the point where it comes to a screeching halt, that could cause the Earth to drift. Either drift closer to the sun.
We're not held in place by gravity. We're held in a magnetic ring. Think of it like a magnetic trough, okay? And we have a little lateral movement, either right or left in that trough. That's why our date changed globally during Hezekiah's time, roughly around 700 BC. All calendars globally, not just in the Bible, but in 8 to 12 other civilizations are documented. Our yearly calendar changed from 360 to 365 and a quarter day. That's a literal change. These people knew how to count. If they didn't, they would have starved to death, because you have to know when your season to plant and harvest had to be. You have to know that winter was over with, and the only way you know that is from the equinox, when the shadows went. They counted the days. They knew exactly. And then witnessing the shadow, they knew exactly a year was over. And they also knew it started to change. The planet passed near Earth. It tilted Earth 26 to 28 degrees, drug us to our outer limits of our magnetic trough, changing our calendar year to 365 and a quarter day year. Okay, and that gave us a larger orbit to go around the sun. Our year is going to change again. When we get hit by a fiery mountain of an asteroid the size of a mountain 5 months later, it will push us slightly towards the sun, enough to change our calendar, and it'll probably, I can't say for sure, but it'll probably be Enoch's calendar, a 364-day a year, to where when we come to the Great Tribulation, it will literally be a day and an hour we won't know, because we have lost track of time. We already lost 12 hours during the first event. Earth would slow down by 12 hours, changing the designated point of impact. And remember, you're talking about half the globe being a point of being hit. If you're on a globe, that only half of it is shielded because you're on the backside, and only the front side is. Well, in March and April, that's the daylight side. With the 12-hour delay rotational change is the opposite side of the globe. That happens to be the false miracle of the Antichrist, where he rains fire on his enemy, changing time and laws. Okay? It's already in our Bible if you understand it through an astronomical viewpoint. That's his false miracle.
Yeah, one of the things I was going to interject there real quick, Gil, one of the things that we know is in the book of Revelation is the fact that it's going to get way hotter. And there are several references to that in Scripture, in the book of Revelation, where it says that the sun is going to burn man, and they're going to cry in pain, and so there are several references to that in Revelation. Also, in the book of the Epistle of Peter, he talks about the elements will melt with fervent heat. And so there is a reference to the earth's destruction by fire. And so I guess that's why I was asking that question. Kind of, I threw that possibility in there. If the either, the only two ways I can see how this is going to happen is either one, the sun is going to get hotter, like Isaiah says, 7 times hotter. Something's going to cause it to become really, really way hotter than it is, 7 times, or the earth is got to somehow be pulled closer to the sun enough, maybe not to destroy it completely, but to cause this incredible increase in the intensity of the rays of the sun and the heat and burning the man.
Yeah, there's another possibility here. Now, let's separate the two issues. One with the skies rolling away and a scroll and everything. A impact from a meteor can give you the same effects as a nuclear explosion, or mushroom cloud, tidal waves, massive devastation. The one that exploded over Russia, I can tell you, without a doubt, Russia was very, very lucky. About half of the meteors explode before they reach Earth, between 40% and half. So, and it could explode at any point of its path. It could explode closer to the city or further away. They were very lucky where they only had a pressure wave that knocked down some of their walls and glass and caused, I think, 1,500 injuries. The first point you were making, how Earth would get hotter, or actually the side of Earth that's facing the plasma tail. Okay, the plasma is going to be so strong it's going to lessen our magnetic field tremendously. So the people who are facing the daylight side, if you're not shielded from this, yes, you will get burned, and it will feel hot. It's like microwave almost. You see, the only thing you need is something thick to shield you, or repel the waves. Remember, it's probably the only the last day of its approach will it be that intense. Maybe 2 days of them. Well, I'd say maybe probably the last day will probably be that type of intensity. So we have two different effects caused by two different parts. The meteor showers after the planet passes. Within an hour, we're crossing the debris field behind it, and that's when the meteor shower is taking place. On the side facing the sun, not the nighttime side. Yeshua comes mid of night. Mid of night is exactly the perfect spot to be, in the safest area. And Earth would tilt. As the planet comes closer to us, we're going to have a 26 to 28 degree tilt. Now keep in mind, when Earth stops, there's about a 13-mile bulge of water and land at the midsection or around the equator of the Earth. When Earth stops, that 13-mile of water is going to start to separate going north and south. I've roughly calculated. Remember, it'll take about 3 to 4 days for all of that water to move. Water moves roughly around 58 miles an hour. From the 45-degree latitude is where the molecules of water are going to move forward, to the further north, and the other ones are going to move. You're going to have dry land around the equator. You could, if it completely stopped for that long a period, but it won't. You're looking between 12 to maybe 18 hours of complete stop. But that would still calculate where, let's say, the Netherlands are, probably close to 600 feet of water there. That's an approximation, not an exact figure.
Yeah, there's another scriptures here, Gil, that it speaks to that in the Revelation. And you mentioned the plasma, but I still have a feeling that the sun, something is going to happen to the sun. It says in Revelation 8:12 that the third part of the sun was smitten, and something hits the sun, whether it is parts of the debris from this object or something else. And then he talks about also in the Revelation, it talks about there that in the Revelation chapter, in chapter 8, 12, the third part of the sun was smitten, and also it talks about in Revelation 7 when John sees the group of people in heaven, it talks about neither shall the sun light on them nor any heat. In other words, the sun is not going to hurt them anymore. So there's a different, and then in Revelation 16:8, it says, and the fourth angel poured out his vial upon the sun, and power was given unto him to scorch men with fire. So something happens to the sun that makes it hotter. It makes it maybe something. Yeah, go ahead.
We had touched on many issues right there, okay, and we blended them into one. I think they're separate. First off, we have to go back and remember this was not written in English. It was written in Hebrew or Latin or whatever, Greek or whatever you want. But the word helios does not necessarily mean the sun. It means a very bright object. A comet can also be a helios under their interpretation. Remember, they didn't have the word comet.
Interesting.
Okay? So go back and read carefully which one they're talking about. I can't tell you exactly which one. But also, when this planet, it's not going to make an eclipse like the moon where it's totally taken. You don't know at what distance it's going to be at. So if it says a third of the sun, that meant a third of it is blocked out, not necessarily being hit. Smitten means not shown also. Smitten could mean hit, but it also means not shown. So this is telling you how much of a partial eclipse you're going to have. A third of it would be blotted out, basically, is what it says here, too. Or it's talking about our comet. Maybe there's something pertaining to a third of it. I'm not sure. But we have to look at the model. Earth is going, see, the tail points away from the sun. The orbital path is different. And the debris path is different. And the tail of the comet is different. There's three different paths.
Yeah, and the other thing that is very interesting, and you brought a very good point here, Gil, is the word helios. This object, Planet X, has been referred to by several people as the second sun. The second sun,
yes.
like a sun. So, John did not know. Could John have maybe seen this sun and just called it Helios and thought it was our sun, but in fact it could have been this other sun?
It says Yeshua is associated with the appearance of the sun. Of this, I can't quote it exactly. I'm just paraphrasing, but the word is not the Son of Man. It's a bright object in the sky. Remember, this thing is going to usher in two people, the anti-Messiah and the real Messiah. The anti-Messiah is going to claim the false miracle, okay? But we have to know the difference. And he will appear mid of night in Jerusalem. The two prophets were going to, it's a private meeting with the two prophets. Remember, we're just at the same time as Passover is starting or about to start, the generators globally are going off. You're literally having oil lamps at that Passover for the next 3.5 days. There's no electricity on earth, okay? So it's a private, that means there's no TV crews or radio crews announcing the two prophets showed up for Passover. If you're practicing his dry rehearsal, that's what Mikra means. Doesn't mean feast, means dry rehearsal. And he says you will practice these forever. Forever means what? Forever. And he says, Sukkot, Passover, and unleavened bread, you have to practice that in Jerusalem. He didn't say practice it in New York or Paris. There's 7 feasts. 3 of them, he requires us to practice them in Jerusalem. Passover and unleavened bread are back to back. So the two prophets appear at Passover. There's no radio crews. There's no electricity. 3.5 days later is when Yeshua shows up mid of night. And he says he brings you to a place in the wilderness, a remnant. The bride and the bridesmaid is chosen and brought to a place in the wilderness where they're there for 1,260 days. That's during the period of the Great Tribulation. They're shielded in this place of safety in the wilderness for 1,260 days. Then the two prophets die, and after their death of 3.5 days, they're resurrected with the dead. They're the first of the dead, then the living. That's all believers are going up to heaven then. The word remnant is not referred to that. It says all believe, and you can be anywhere on earth for the rapture. This first taking away is not to heaven. It's to the wilderness. It's called the greater exodus. And that's the way it's qualified in the scriptures. If the word greater is used, that means there's two exodus. We only know of one right now. That's the exodus of Egypt, and that's the lesser one. The greater one is about to happen. And it's going to be a private meeting because generators are going to be turned off, because you can't have generators if you're inside the plasma tail, because it's an electrical storm of immense magnitude. Generators and electronics cannot be on, not even battery operated. So there's no announcement. It's a private meeting. Read Revelation carefully and tell me, how can all this be private with the return of Messiah, with the return of the two prophets? Now we have a model that works, that it unites with what his words are saying.
And the sign that this is about to happen, according to Revelation chapter 6, is that sixth seal, the humongous earthquake that is going to be felt all over the earth, and the meteor showers falling on the earth. That's going to be the precursor of the big event, like you said. But I have one question here from Andrea, and she lives in Hawaii. She said, about the Fukushima radiation and any timelines you may know for the radiation in the oceans and in the air, not just for the West Coast of the Pacific. She says, I used to love to swim in the ocean, but since March 2011, I haven't gone near the ocean, and I know there are issues with sea life as well. So she wants to know about the radiation and the timelines, anything that you can speak to that as far as radiation in the oceans and in the air.
The testing of the water by independent people, it's not as severe as what we would expect. Okay, we were looking for higher levels. Remember, the Pacific Ocean is a vast ocean. Absolutely, it takes half the globe. So it's very well diluted. Next, the other issue, is it as dangerous as what they say it is? Well, that's a argumentative point. You can look up a gentleman. Let me see if I can find him right here real quick. He worked at Los Alamos. And at that time, remember, they didn't, radiation was new at the time. They handled the yellow cake with their hands all day long for many, many years. And then he went to college, became a nuclear engineer, and he designed his own, one of the most advanced nuclear power plants that was much more efficient and everything. And they don't let it operate. They closed it because it's too doggone efficient. He swam in the pool. He was the guy in charge of safety. He swam, remember where the radioactive stuff is glowing at the bottom, the rods and everything, bluish light?
Mm-hmm. Right.
He swam in the pool to prove to people it's not as, these regulatory things that the government put out are way overboard. Otherwise, all of us at the plant when we were making this would have died. You see? He even shows himself eating some of this radioactive material. He says it does not bind with the protein of humans. It passes right. And he does it right in front of everybody. He's been doing it for months. Let's see what his name is. People ought to look at this. This is a guy that's out there. He's factual. You look up a free nuclear economy. I don't know the gentleman's name at the moment, but this is probably a video of the 80s. He has a white shirt, looks like a typical engineer. And you go to about the middle of the video, you see him actually eating and proving it to people. It's not as deadly as what it's only when it makes that flash you have a problem. It's sending out gamma. He says that's when it's a problem.
Well, we're coming to the end of the radio program, Gail. The last question for the audience out there, the arrival of Planet X. what is the latest timeline for arrival? And if you just also want to talk about your book, I know you have a book.
Okay, we'll touch on the arrival. The arrival is an estimate, like always. We can only confirm arrival from a sighting. There is no sighting in the public realm. Estimates is we are concerned when the Bible gives us clear indication the moon at the foot of Virgo is one of the elements, and another one is a 3.5-year drought prior to arrival, global drought. We may be in the starting phases. Be aware. Look for it. See if it's there. If there's no global drought, don't worry about it. It's going to have to be some other one. But right now, we're looking for the beginning phases of a global drought that's going to affect food. 2020 and 2021 is the year that the moon is at the foot of Virgo. It matches the story of Jacob, where when he went to leave his father-in-law, he says, I worked for you for 20 years. We're in the time of Jacob's trouble. From 2021, when Esau declared war against Jews and Christians, to from 2001 to 2021 is 20 years. Mirrors the story. So again, greatly concerns me. I can't confirm it unless I have a sighting. But be aware, be watchman on the wall. Each church should have an amateur astronomer to warn the group, because you won't be able to depend on people announcing this on the internet right now, because they're passing laws stopping us.
And you have a book that you put out, Gil?
You go to planet7x.net. You go down to the middle, you see a book there, just click on it. You can go to either Dropbox or Google Drive's the best to get it, and you can download all this for free. I also have another file for any astronomer called Estimates for 2021 that shows you all of the coordinates, where to look in space, how it would look like in different phases. It's going to get close to Saturn, and it'll get close enough to Jupiter, a certain time frame in the future. We should be able to observe perturbations in the orbits and the moon, because it's too close in proximity not to change them. So if you know how to do that, there's the data for you to verify. We see these orbits of these planets being warped. Remember, it's still going to be cloaked, but you'll be able to observe phenomena that indicates you have a problem. And so it's all free for people to have access to.
Yeah, and those slides are really, really very good. I have seen them. I have heard a lot of good things said about it, and so they're like you said, they're there free to download. You can even show them to in a group setting to people, and go to GILL BROUSSARD's website and buy some of his products. I know that he depends on that for his livelihood, and so thank you so much, Gil, for being with us and taking the time to share with God's people. And thank you, Larry, for being with us. And Chuck, thanks for working with us and being in the background there, taking care of the boards. And thank you all for listening in. This has been a special broadcast with GILL BROUSSARD. This is Augusto Perez with Appearance Radio. Until next time.